Good morning, folks. Welcome back to Markelly Farm. We're back here in the shop, and we're back on our John Deere Model E horse and a half hit and miss engine. We've got a few more parts to clean up and get painted, and I have some other little odds and ends that I need to fix on here before we get this thing going back together. So stick around. We'll get some of this stuff done and get closer to putting her back together. Now, in the last video, I neglected to tell you that we still had the flywheels to clean up, which we've got about halfway done with that. We've done, I think, this side, and all we have left to do is this side. But our crank handle here, we're having an issue with it, and I'll show you what it is. The crank handle goes down into the flywheel like this. Its centrifugal force, once the engine's running, pulls that back down in there. Well, it's got a pin that goes through. It's usually slotted like flat screwdriver on one side, and then it's got a thread on this side that screws into this portion, goes all the way through this handle. Well, that pin is broke. See right there? So what we're going to have to do, I cannot get it free from this side. I'm going to try it again today because I did squirt some penetrating oil in there. But if I can't get that loose, what I'm going to have to do is either with my die grinder or my cutoff wheel, I'm going to have to cut this side of the pin off so we can get the pin out of this hole, because it looks like it's just barely in that hole. So once we get one side cut off, it should come out. And then I'm hoping that this is broken off somewhere where the threads were, so I can just go ahead and screw this out this way. I'll weld a nut on here or whatever and get this portion of the pin out. If it's broke above the threads, it's probably not going to come all the way through. And because I've already tried to twist this out, I've screwed the threads up here. So if that's the case, I can't get it out, I'll have to cut this part off, drill this piece out, and then re-tap that. And then we'll make a new pin to go through here. Okay, we got our piece cut out. This was the end of the pin in there that wouldn't come loose. So it shouldn't be threaded in here, so we should be able to punch this out, but it is threaded in here. So we'll try to weld a nut on there and spin that out. If not, we'll have to cut that off too. Well, it's not punching out of there. It's frozen solid, so we're going to add some heat to this. Try to break her loose. All right. Worked good. Anytime you heat the metal around something, it expands. I try not to get it much heat on the pin itself, but as soon as that expands, it allows that pin to go through. It was stuck pretty good, but we'll let that cool off and we'll clean that up. Now we got to work on this over here. We'll get a nut welded on that. Well, that didn't go well. Okay, we got it fixed. So we've got this 1/4-inch bolt threaded all the way in over here. So we're just going to take this back out for now until we get this painted. Once we, well, I'll probably do this before I paint. That way it's ready to go back in. So what I'll do is I'll cut this bolt off, this head off right here. And I'll back it out a little bit first. Just barely cut the head off. And then I'll take the grinder, the cutoff wheel, and cut a screwdriver slot in the end of that shaft. And then that way we can screw it in flush. We'll put a little Loctite on it so it can't come out. Be all fixed up. But works perfectly. All right, our screw is flush, and it's just barely sticking through this side. It's perfect what we want. So we'll screw that back out. We'll get everything cleaned up, and we'll get this thing painted. All right, flywheel is clean. I noticed this interesting little thing here when we were cleaning it up. See these grooves in here? This is the side that the belt pulley goes on. So when this thing was running the belt was cutting grooves in the arms here. Pretty cool patina there. Next thing we have to clean is the head. So to clean the head, I want to take the valves out of the head. I've got new valve springs coming, so we don't have to worry about cleaning these up. But we'll keep them just as backups. So to take your valves loose, you have to straighten these cotter keys out that are going through the top of the valve. And then pull them out. Should be able to just twist it around, holding the spring down. And then got this little keeper washer. And then the spring comes off, and then the valve will just push out the other direction, and we'll maintain which valve goes where. We'll know this is the intake, so we'll keep track of which is the intake valve because the valves are seated in the seats already and they've got a good seal, so we want to make sure the right valve goes back in the right place. So our exhaust valve, it's a little bit more stiff, but the pin is already straight. So we'll just push our spring down. The exhaust spring's a lot tighter than the intake spring because it has to be. Take that little washer out, and then our valve spring comes out, and then we'll be able to pull our valves out one by one. So we'll probably be able to tell the exhaust valve because it's got a little more carbon on it than the intake valve, so that'll be fairly easy. But just in case, we'll put the springs and the washers and everything back on these. And then we'll set these aside. Now we'll get some mineral spirits and a brush and we'll clean this thing up as best we can, get the grease off of it. Got our head fairly well cleaned up, just got a little bit to go here and there. But we have another broken screw here, and this is what holds our choke flap on. There's just a little flat flap that opens up, and there's a spring here on a screw that holds tension on it to keep it in place, and the screw has been busted off. So we're going to go through about the same process. There's a little bit to grab onto. I might get a file and try to flatten two sides of that to where I can grab it with pliers. We'll hit it with some penetrating oil on the back. If that doesn't loosen it up, we'll hit it with a little bit of heat right here, and so on and so on. Well, that screw is being very stubborn, so we loaded up the back of the hole with some penetrating oil. We're going to let this sit. We're going to dinner at my cousin's house, so we'll get right back to this in this video. It's going to be probably 2 days because we're busy tomorrow, but it won't be 2 days for you. We'll be right back. All right, folks, it's actually been 3 days, but we're back out in the shop, back working on this head for our John Deere hit and miss motor. We had left the back side of this screw hole full of penetrating oil, and now it's empty. So I'm hoping that the oil penetrated down in there and we can finally get that screw out. It is not budging still, and we've about lost our little nub on top here. So I think we're just going to have to drill and tap it. We've got our brand new choke flapper, so we had to check the size of the screw. It's 1/4 so that'll be easy. So for a 1/4 bolt, we need a drill size of 13/64, and then we're just going to drill down through the back side of that hole because it'll act as a guide. Now the head's ready for paint. I think what I'm going to do now is, you can see these casting marks. They didn't really spend much time cleaning those up. They got a big area here, some other areas on the back side. I'm just going to take my sander and make those look a lot nicer. Our head's all done. Next thing we need to clean up is this little thing here. It's the trip lever that goes on the push rod. So we'll get this pin out of here. I got a new spring for this, and we'll clean this all up so we can paint it. Got our trip lever holder and our trip lever all cleaned up nice, ready for paint. Next thing is our crank handle. Get that cleaned up. Next thing we need to clean up that's going to be painted is our rocker arm. You can see it's been welded before. So we're also going to sand this, make this look a little nicer here. Hopefully it stays together. If not, there are still available. I can still buy these on Flywheel Supply. But we'll clean this up. Take this bolt out, clean the bolt up, get it ready for paint. The rocker arm looks a lot better now. We've got it cleaned up a little bit. You see they brazed it on one side and then welded it on the other. But we can get this painted now. Got this little mushroomed over area here. We'll probably flatten that out again so it's nice and flat. I think this area is supposed to be here though to catch the spring. Our fill plugs need to be painted. They're a little hard to hold on to. So they're 3/4 pipe, so I just put them in a 3/4 pipe fitting so I could hold on to the fitting while I cleaned them. Our crank bearing caps, these need to be cleaned up. They have a little paint on the outside. We'll mask all this other rest of this area off. Got our main bearing caps all masked off, ready to paint. So I'm going to start taking some of this stuff out into the greenhouse paint booth. And we only got a couple more items to do. We got our belt pulley we need to clean up. And we also found a spot where it's broke. Right there. So we're going to need to weld that up and clean that up. Straighten it out a little bit with a hammer. Because a new one of these is 85 bucks. So I'm going to fix the one I got. We got to clean it all up. It had some kind of sticky mess on here from trying to keep the belt from slipping. Got it cleaned up pretty good. We took it over on the anvil. We flattened out the back, whatever was bent. Cleaned the inside as best we could. So now it's time. We're going to get the welder, weld these holes up, and we'll sand that off. We were able to fill it up. We had to put in quite a bit of material to get everything to connect. And then anywhere where it looked thin on the back side, we went ahead and did some backfilling back here. So when we grind it off, we won't get super thin. So now we just got to grind off the outside of that. Okay, here's our repair right here. Looks pretty good, nice and solid. So now we can clean this up and paint this too. Well, we got most of the pieces, well, actually all the pieces we need to paint out in the greenhouse. We're going to go out and bring in the stuff we painted last time. Had to change my shirt because I didn't want to get anything greasy. Okay, we got our fresh parts in here. We're going to go out in the paint booth now and lay down some paint on the ones we just cleaned up. Okay, folks, everything primed and painted. Ready to rock. Now that our painting's done, back inside, I'm going to show you here on our engine block. I remember I told you when we did the disassembly that everything looked okay with the governor area. Well, I've since figured out that my shaft here, there's a lot of play in it. So, governor I can't tell because it's engaged with this gear here, but once I get this off, I'll be able to check the other one. I've ordered the bushings. I have the bushings and the tool to put them in. So let's get those in real quick. First thing we got to do is take this nut off, and then our gear will come off, and then we can take the shaft out. Now the best way to break it loose is I stuck a little hammer handle through the governor box, through the gear, and then just get your crescent wrench and spin the nut off. We've already got it loose. Gonna come right off. Okay, we got our camshaft out. I took one of the new bushings and put it on there and verified that it's a lot tighter than the other one. You can see the bushing has a notch in it right here. That notch acts as an oil hole, so you put it vertical or very close to vertical, and then oil will fall in here and get to the shaft. We'll show you here on the old one. See the notch right there? So oil, when it flings around in here in the crankcase, will fall down in that groove and it gets on the shaft. And the shaft has, you can see the lines in it. So those lines let the oil travel further in. We're going to polish this up a little bit before we put it back in. Now they send this tool, goes inside the bushing like that, and they say to use an air hammer on this. They say do not use a big hammer or a press because there's a possibility that you might crack your crankcase. So air hammer it is. And I'm assuming since the bushing is the same size all the way through, we can drive it through that way to get it out and also drive it through the same way to put it back in. Had to wait for the air compressor to air back up. So you want to come through to where this cup is just sticking through the casting here. So we'll go ahead and put our camshaft back in. I'll clean up this governor a little bit first. We'll put our gear back on and button her up. All right, we got our shaft back in. We cleaned up the nut and everything while we had it out. You can see there's not very much give in there now at all. Spins good. You see it spins the governor down there. There's no timing issues with the governor gear down there because that just spins around. And it's impossible to get this out of time with the cam on the other side because there's a keyway in here. So it only goes in one way. We put a little oil on that shaft before we put it in there, so it's good to go. Now, one thing to note, if you were to change the bushing for the governor, this nut right here is left-handed thread. So you would want to spin this off the opposite direction if you were taking it loose. Now that we got that done, I'm going to go back out and pull the masking tape off of those parts while the paint is still just a little soft. Got the tape off of our parts. Everything's looking good. Probably a good time to call it a day. This is probably a pretty long video by now. But now I remember I told you last time that we were getting ready to reassemble, but I had a lot more stuff to paint. But this time, for sure, we are ready to go back together now. So the only thing I have left is we'll just polish up the little parts as we put them back on, but we won't film that. We'll just do it as we go. But real excited to get this project back together. So I hope you enjoyed it today. Thanks for hanging out with me. We'll see you next time here on Markelly Farm. Stay safe, stay healthy, folks.